Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Rupert. I'm the director of the Office of Wildland Fire. Well, first, I'd like to thank ITC, thank the executive board for the invitation to present and to be part of this year's symposium. I'd also really like to thank the Wildland Fire or the Fire Subcommittee. The members of the subcommittee have been great partners over the last several years. We've had many discussions about, opportunities, challenges, and the ITC Fire Subcommittee is a really important part of, that sort of interagency community and leadership within that community and really helping to solve really big problems. Well, I thought I'd start by talking a little bit about, okay, so where are we across the United States with wildfire? And we're in a tough spot, and I know everyone who's a part of this symposium, has this understanding and this perspective. But this just really sort of helps illustrate it, and really helps describe where we are and what we're facing. So this is the 2020 USDA Forest Service's hazard potential map. So, this really describes and illustrates the sort of the vulnerability of, a particular place to really impactful, intense, and catastrophic wildfire. The hot colors are those places that are most vulnerable, and we have a big problem across the nation, particularly across the West, southern plains, the southeast, portions of the upper Midwest. It really is a nationwide problem. One of the really important perspectives I think of this map is, so, where you see those hot colors, those are the vegetation conditions that are in place that largely drive this assessment. And those colors don't really change until something happens. And that something is either an intense wildfire, and over the last 3 or 4 years, in particular, we have seen the consequence of that with record large, intense, impactful fires affecting thousands and thousands of communities and people, infrastructure, as well as, other values, cultural values, resource values. So those hot colors, they don't change until something happens. The alternative to these large, impactful wildfires is essentially management, reducing, adjusting, altering, managing that vegetation at the scale that we're looking at, through an action like prescribed fire. And when you start to think about all of the pieces and parts of management at that scale, the capacity, the people to actually do it, all the coordination and planning, because those warm colors don't just exist in a single jurisdiction. It's not just a Forest Service problem or just a Department of Interior problem or just, a particular tribal nation problem or a particular state. These cross jurisdictions. And so all the coordination, all the collaboration, all the leveraging that needs to be part of managing the vegetation across such broad areas, and other factors. To implement more prescribed fire, we've also got to essentially address smoke issues and public health concerns and all the coordination and collaboration that's necessary to do that. And that needs to occur, well beyond just the interagency wildland fire community. That means working with public health officials, public health organizations and agencies. And so again, it just really helps reinforce and describe the kind of focused coordination and collaboration that needs to occur at such a broad scale. So, interagency coordination. what is interagency fire? What does it look like? And again, I suspect is familiar to most folks who are participating today, but just to kind of, again, quickly run through. So the Federal Wildland Fire Management Community, DOI land management agencies, to include science capacity in DOI, U.S. Geologic Survey, and increasingly the Bureau of Reclamation. BOR administers many areas, particularly in the West. Those areas, think about the map we just saw, are impacted by wildfire and risk, face the risk of wildfire just as any and many other areas in the West do. I mean, increasingly, BOR is very much a part of sort of the discussion, the strategy to reduce that risk in DOI. U.S. Forest Service, big player in federal wildland fire management. There's also the U.S. Fire Administration, which is organized in DHS. NOAA, weather staff, predictive services have been very important part of federal wildland fire fighting for many years with weather forecasts and fire forecasts and prediction. And that role is only increasing, the importance of that role. Outside of the federal family, this is not a federal issue. This really is a nationwide issue, challenge, crisis, and it very much, the interagency wildland fire community very much is a collaborative community. So incredibly important, tribal nations. And then this body, ITC, Intertribal Timber Council, is a major player across the interagency wildland fire community, and particularly leadership of the community. ITC's involvement in the Wildland Fire Leadership Council, WFLC, which is the highest level of fire leadership, helping to inform and identify sort of fundamental policy and policy issues that need to be addressed as we're interacting with this nationwide problem. The Fire Executive Council, which is chartered and includes members of the federal wildland fire community, particularly Forest Service and DOI. ITC, as well as state foresters, are participating regularly in the Fire Executive Council. Within Interior, we have a more focused Interior Fire Executive Council, which really is critically important in Interior to really be a fundamental sort of bridge between policy and administration, and then the operational work that goes on across Interior, in places like the National Interagency Fire Center in NIFC and Boise, as well as all the hundreds and hundreds of individual units, land management units across the nation where firefighters are actually stationed and actually working from. Fire Management Board, composed largely of the fire directors that sit out at NIFC in Boise. NWCG, which is the standard developing body of interagency fire. So how does the collaboration that occurs across the interagency community work? How is it that, a tribal engine and a state engine, and a federal engine and a local engine can all respond to the same incident? The hoses and the equipment function. It's NWCG. It's a collaborative body, so it includes, really all of the stakeholders within the interagency community, and teams and committees within NWCG develop the standards that we all agree to operate by. So, incredibly important. NMAC is the group that when conditions across the United States become severe. So, we have the fire rating system, 1 through 5, 5 being the most extreme fire activity, particularly when we reach preparedness level 4 and 5 across the country. NMAC becomes very important in terms of helping to coordinate resources and the movement of resources and the distribution of resources across multiple incidents that are occurring at the same time. So that gives you a sense of the kind of coordination and really, the scale of coordination and collaboration that occurs across the interagency fire community. So in DOI, and this is pretty similar, I think, to how fire management programs are sort of organized within agencies and bureaus. So in Interior, we have preparedness activities. So that's all of the activity and all of the funding and all of the support and the investment that we make, essentially to be prepared to interact with fire. So the engines, many of the actual firefighters in Interior are all working under this preparedness program, planning, fire planning, equipment management, cash management, all of that work that really sets us up as we get into really busy times of the fire year. Suppression operations. So once the fire starts and once it crosses an initial threshold, that becomes suppression operations. And so all the collaboration, the collaborative response, incident management teams, all of that actual work is occurring under suppression operations. So then all of the standards that are applied and all of that interaction on incidents is administered through suppression operations. And then fuels management, and this has been growing and growing for many years now. It's all of the work, the fuels work, the vegetation work, the pre-fire work, and it's where the focus has been shifting for a number of years now. The idea, going back to that map with all of the fire hazard potential on it, work, that pre-fire work, fuels management work, fuels reduction. I think increasingly, we're recognizing, again, looking at sort of this program diagram, we're recognizing with the level of risk and the level and the magnitude of wildfire that we are seeing across the nation and the trajectory that we know we're on here, for that to continue, there's, I think the recognized perspective, we can't suppress our way out of this challenge. And so that shifting focus to fuels management, pre-fire work, and what kind of framework, what kind of investment, what kind of capacity, what kind of planning and collaboration is necessary to manage those fuels and that vegetation across the country to lower that vulnerability, that hazard potential, and ultimately that risk, so that when the fire does come, because remember, we're talking about natural systems here, right? Fire adapted systems that have always seen fire and always will see fire. How do we manage those systems in a way that vulnerability and that risk is reduced, so that when the fire does come, it's not an intense mega fire with all of the catastrophic impacts, but rather it's a lower intensity, less impactful fire. And moving down the list, so burned area rehabilitation, BAR. What are we doing after the fire? All of that rehabilitation work that has a major land management component to it. So, and you can also say that of fuels management as well. Fuels management isn't just, firefighters going out and reducing fuel, right? Fuels management really is inherently, a land management activity. And so that work that needs to be done before a fire, that work that needs to be done after a fire involves really increased levels of coordination, collaboration between fire programs and land managers and land management programs. Also in DOI, we have focused support for facilities, construction, and maintenance, and that is exactly what you think it is. Fire stations and fire offices and caches. And then we have the Joint Fire Science Program, which is focused on delivering science for decision support for planning to fire managers and fire planners so that we can be more effective in developing strategies to reduce the risk of fire, but then also to more safely interact with fire and more effectively rehabilitate after fire. So talking sort of about those programmatic areas within fire, in interior, we talk about an integrated approach. So, I mean, I talked a little bit about, so before a fire, pre-fire, right? The fire management, land management connection after a fire, the fire management, land management connection. These capacities are well positioned to essentially be leveraged. So we need qualified, experienced, prepared wildland firefighters during fire suppression and all of those operations. We also need those same skills before a fire to implement, for example, prescribed fire, right? To have that interaction with fire, because there's risk that goes along with that. And, you know, those qualifications and those skill sets are necessary for prescribed fire. But we also need land management before fire, all of the planning that goes into, you know, how to manage an acre of land. And again, after fire, all of the planning and all of the follow through and the implementation of all those activities to rehabilitate after a fire isn't necessarily just a, you know, doesn't necessarily need just a qualified firefighter, right? And so how we integrate that and the kind of activities that a firefighter supports and the kind of focus that a land manager brings over the sort of the course of a full cycle here. Because you can think of, you know, having the before on a particular acre of land, you know, okay, there's what's occurring before a fire, during a fire, after a fire. Well, after the fire really is just, you know, in many ways, sort of the first circumstance before the next fire. So it actually sort of ends up, I think, you know, you can think of it as a cycle, and those are all related to each other. And so the work we're doing after a fire can really sort of prepare us and start to prepare a particular you know, acre of land for the next fire. And again, ultimately, the opportunity here and the desire here is that we've got all of this land that is being managed in such a way that that risk and that vulnerability and that vegetation isn't going to be driving catastrophic, intense, impactful fire. So what's it looking like this year? Just sort of running through these maps. This is the 21 outlook, May through August. You know, we're already starting to see wildfire in many areas, particularly across the Southwest. So the outlook is produced out at NIFC with predictive services and fire managers, and it really looks at what is the condition of sort of vegetation, as well as what are the weather forecasts over a 4-month period. And so the red is above normal potential fire activity, and then the green is below normal, and all those areas that are just white are sort of just normal And you can see for this month, for May, in the Southwest, there is above normal fire potential across much of the Southwest. As we get into June, and there is a sort of a seasonal pattern here, right? And those who are really familiar with wildland fire, will recognize these patterns. We start to see that fire potential start to move west to the Pacific coast and up the Pacific coast into the Pacific Northwest. July, again, we continue to see that trend along the Pacific coast, Pacific Northwest, and then back into the Intermountain West and the Great Basin. And then August, some sustained activity across the Pacific West, Pacific Northwest, and again, that sort of Intermountain West and Great Basin. Beyond August, generally we would expect for some of that fire activity to move down through the Southwest again, and then to the southern Pacific coast. And as we get into even, late autumn and early winter, that's when we see oftentimes, that fire activity in places like Southern California. In terms of NDOI, the assets that we have in place for this year, we have nearly 5,000 firefighters that are on board or being onboarded and ready to go and available for assignment as part of management of incidents as we see them popping up over the course of the year. We have 91 single engine air tankers. So those national assets, those aviation assets, interior, we manage the contracts around the seats, and then the Forest Service manages the large air tanker assets. Interior, we have 347 helicopters, either owned or on contract, that are ready to go, 19 water scoopers, well over 500 engines, and then another 260 pieces of specialty heavy equipment, everything from bulldozers to tenders and other specialty equipment. So what are the priorities that we're really focused on right now in DOI? And this is not the complete list, and it's a pretty high level sort of list of priorities, but to give you a sense of where a lot of that focus in interior. And of course, there is, that operational focus that's always in place. And as we progress through the spring and into the summer, that operational focus will increasingly sort of take up more and more of our time. If in fact we end up with a summer that is anything like last summer, which I think many of us expect we will have that kind of summer, unfortunately, again, our focus will be almost exclusively operational. But outside of that, we've had a focus for several years now, and we'll continue to have a focus on workforce. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. There is a lot of interaction right now and engagement looking at things like pay issues, fighter career pathways and professionalization, this whole sort of recognized need to really move from what has been a seasonal workforce to a year-round workforce. And that is driven by fire activity, right? Because we now recognize that wildfire is occurring year-round across the nation. And so a seasonal workforce just isn't adequate to address that year-round need. So that transition to a seasonal workforce, expanding diversity, inclusion, equity across the wildfire fighting workforce, it's a huge emphasis, is a huge need and a huge focus, as well as other issues like mental health. There's a tremendous need to pay attention to these important issues. I think it's clear that this focus on workforce is going to continue, and I think there's a great opportunity to really develop those career opportunities and improve sort of the workplace conditions and opportunities for wildland firefighters as we move forward. In DOI, we also have a laser focus on collaboration, consultation, support, working with tribal nations. Obviously, ITC is a critically important part of that as we talk about wildland fire. I think we're very well positioned in Interior with the relationship that we have had and we do have with ITC to help really identify, okay, what are those challenges that need to be addressed? What are those real opportunities that really help support that partnership with tribal nations? One of the things we're working on and have nearly complete at this point, we've been developing an MOU between ITC and the Department of Interior, and we're looking at how we work together, focusing on things like reducing risk, that broad scale, landscape scale, cross-jurisdictional collaboration to reduce risk before a fire comes. We're looking at, and fundamentally important to that is the cohesive strategy. And we built into this MOU, promoting fire-adapted communities, resilient landscapes, enhancing wildfire response. Those are sort of the three goals and the three pillars of the cohesive strategy, and sort of foundational to how DOI and ITC are working together and talking about all of those challenges and opportunities. We have a focus on recognizing and promoting the role and value of Indigenous burning, and within that, the role of prescribed fire as well, supporting restoration, rehabilitation, maintenance of lands that have been affected by fire, looking for ways to support greater economic vitality of local communities and traditional uses of lands, strengthening workforce through outreach, recruitment, training, employment. Ultimately, most importantly, within Interior as well, then working together to fulfill those federal tribal trust responsibilities. So I'm really proud of that relationship we have with ITC, and the work that we're doing, and the great opportunity we have working together moving forward as well. Within DOI, a real priority focus on science and climate. So bringing science into decision making and planning, pre-fire, during fire, post-fire, identifying what the science gaps are, coming up with a strategy to bridge those gaps, and then importantly, bringing that science effectively into wildland fire and land management and decision making. And then, of course, the interaction with climate. Much of the trajectory that we're on with fire, large, catastrophic, impactful wildfires, has a direct tie to climate. And so really adequately and appropriately interacting with those climate issues and using science to help inform our interaction with that is a huge focus as well. And finally, wildland fire information technology. And again, this has at least in my mind, this has a strong connection with how we think about science and climate, and really much of everything that, I've sort of talked about this morning. Technology really is an opportunity for us to more efficiently and effectively have the kind of sort of information sharing, access to information to support those decisions, to inform those decisions and inform that planning. delivering that science in an effective and an efficient way. You know, think of like fire models and the technology piece of that, as well as access to all of that information. And that's sort of on the sort of preparedness and the planning sort of through that lens. But IT then also becomes vitally important to support our actual response and, you know, effective and safe response, communications, and connectivity, so that, you know, all of that information is available while a fire is burning on an incident, to improve that situational awareness, help inform decisions for a safer response. So technology is sort of, in my mind, sort of foundationally important in terms of how we can really efficiently and effectively bring all of these sort of pieces and parts together, and have that information be accessible and available for fire managers, for land managers, for communities, for stakeholders to make good decisions and have good, solid awareness. So I think I will stop there, and I think, have some time to interact and take some questions. Thank you, everyone.
My name is Pete Wakeland. I'm a Grand Ronde tribal member from Oregon. This is my 5th year as the Chief Forester for the BIA, and my first year ever doing anything on video, so it's a little different, but I'll get through it the best I can. I'd like to thank ITC for organizing the symposium. They do a great job every year, and this one certainly took some extra effort, so hats off to them for making this happen. Just a quick overview. I'll move through the slides quickly so I don't run over my time, but if you have questions, click the hand raise button, and I'll get to you as soon as I can. After having gone, you know, a number of years with the majority of my staff positions at central office vacant, we're finally getting staffed up and moving things along. We do have some positions to be filled, though. We actually have 4 positions at BOFARP, 1 position with forestry, and I'd really like to encourage people to take a look at it and apply. I think you'd enjoy working with the staff that we have on board at central office. So our message up to leadership at OMB is efficiency and effectiveness. We've got some pretty amazing work done each year with some pretty tight budget constraints that we'll see in a minute. But we're getting noticed. People are asking questions about portable projects that we funded and how the BIA manages account for the majority of the national harvest of timber for interior. They're noticing the good work that we do in fires and fuels, and they're asking questions about how we spatially show effectiveness of our forestry and fuels treatments. They're asking questions because they're noticing, and that's good stuff. We need to keep it up. I wanted to plug the Indian Forest Management Assessment. As you guys know, it's mandated by NFIRMA, and it's done every 10 years. The next one's due in 2023, and the IFMAT team is already working on it. The message is this: it's important. That's our chance to let Congress know about Indian forestry. It lets them know, you know, what we do well and what the challenges are. So please, your participation is critical. If IFMAT calls, engage with them. We really need your input. I wanted to touch on forestry budget. As you can see, forestry budgets haven't fluctuated too much over the past 5 years. The TPA budget, it's fluctuated by about 1.7 million. The project budget is fluctuated by about 745,000. But the takeaway on forestry budgets is that based on 2019 data, we're estimating that we need an annual budget of about 51 million in TPA and about 57 million for forestry projects. And those numbers will change, you know, based on a number of factors such as current workforce, retirements, projects accomplished, and backlog of acres in need of treatment. But we simply need an increase in funding to get more work done. In 2020, our budget was down slightly, and our staffing at the regions and agencies, remained challenging. The complications from COVID did create some issues, but we were still able to harvest about 393 million board feet of timber, and it generated about $53 million for the tribes. Our national allowable cut, you can see past year's trends. The AAC varies a bit, but it's around 720 million board feet. And while budgets have gone up and down slightly, you can see we harvest on average somewhere around 50% of the AAC annually. And that's something we need to improve on. And every year we do the best we can with budget formulation, and we do all we can to let the appropriators know about our trust responsibility and what we need in order to get our work done. But we need to do better. The forest development accomplishments, we currently have a backlog of about 477,000 acres of thinning and about 496,000 acres of planting. In 2020, we were able to complete about 18,000 acres of thinning, about 11,000 acres of planting. And it's not hard to see that we're not able to keep up with the backlog, and it'll continue to grow bigger until budgets increase and we're able to get more of the project work completed. The timber team is new, and it's something we've discussed for years. This idea of standing up a timber team to help get forestry work done in the field. As you know, in many locations, we've struggled due to low workforce numbers, and we fall behind. Caleb Kane is our projects forester, and he was instrumental in the development of the team. In 2019, we finally made the pitch to our boss to approve the timber team, and he did. In 2020, we hired 6 foresters, procured equipment, and got things going. We asked the regions to submit us a list of projects that they needed done, and not surprisingly, we got quite a list. The timber team's already completed some of the work and would have been able to start earlier and get more done, but we did, and we still do have some COVID issues that we have to consider before sending the team out to the work site. I gotta say, the members of the team are really competent foresters. They're sharp. And the feedback we've received has been absolutely positive, and it's proving to be well worth the investment. And I'd like to note too that the timber team isn't just a get the work done team. It's an opportunity to train foresters. So if there are foresters at tribal locations that would like to work with the timber team, even on short-term basis, few months to 6 months, whatever it might be, please let us know. We'd love to see you guys get involved. The TSOG. I wanted to take just a minute to point this group out. John Basquette and Orby Danzuka are central office foresters that coordinate the TSOG. And it's a group of foresters from central office in the regions that do a lot of work that doesn't get a lot of publicity or attention, but it's critical and it's required. They update manuals and handbooks. They revise and develop policy proposals. They work on enhancements to TAMs. And at times they take on just about any project we push their way. The foresters from the regions, do their work on a voluntary basis with us, and they do it because they really care about Indian forestry. It's pretty commendable. For the collective work that they do, I think we'd just like to say thank you, and special thanks to the regional staff for helping us, make everything work. At Beaufort, branch of Forest Resources and Planning, the staff at Beaufort work with the regions, agencies, and tribes, and they assist with the completion of forest inventories and assist with forest management plans. So you may know Karen DeWard. She was a longtime BIA forester, and and held a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge. And Karen retired in 2020. We want to thank her for all she contributed, and she definitely will be missed. Don Patterson, our branch chief at Beaufort, has done a very good job getting some new staff on board and getting more work completed. And I'd like to point out that we have vacancies at Beaufort, so please let us know if you're interested in those. You can see from the accomplishments for 2020, it's pretty impressive, especially having vacant positions. About 38% of the CFI projects are active right now at Beaufort, and about 62% of the projects are with the regions and with the tribe. And there's a lot of work to be done, and the Beaufort staff is available to provide technical assistance and training when requested. And without going into a long history of InfoDat and FIRST, I'll just say that we've been putting a lot of effort into making improvements in InfoDat that should make reporting easier. And speaking of reporting, singing the same song you've heard me sing before. It's important. It's how we tell our story, and it's how we show our accomplishments. So please report data. We need your data. It's critical. You'll be seeing some improvement on GIS front this year and next year, and our intent is to build in the spatial component to our reporting that we've actually lacked in the past. We hope to be able to spatially show what kind of work was done, where it was done, and where the work still needs to be done. And this will happen in coordination with our fire and fuels programs, and together we'll be able to provide a better picture of what we do and be able to show the effectiveness of forestry and fuels treatments. More to come on that, and you'll likely see some information coming from the BIA in the near future. With pathways, as you know, NFIRMA also mandates that we provide educational employment opportunities for tribal students. Between forestry and fire, we have about 45 pathways positions available. Of course, some of those are filled, so that number fluctuates. And as pathways positions are advertised through USA Jobs. I believe they're doing it twice a year now. Those positions come with annual tuition support and summer job placement and non-competitive job placement at the end of the program. It's a pretty good deal. Our pathways students contribute to our future workforce, and we need more students in the program. If you're a student that may be interested, let us know and we'll do all we can to assist you getting through the process. With the branch of Wildland Fire Management, Leon Ben was our fire director until very recently, and Leon's now back home in Western Region and taken on the next chapter in his career as the agency superintendent. We want to thank Leon for all he did for the fire program while he was there, and we know he'll continue to do good things going forward. With that, we also welcome Bodie Shaw. Bodie is the Deputy Regional Director in the Northwest Region and also a longtime BIA employee, and he's now doing a detail for us for 120 days as the Fire Director. So we thank Bodie for jumping in to help us. I know this is a little hard to see, but it was more of a picture than a slide. And this is just a quick budget compared to last year. For the most part, the budget stayed flat, but there were some increases in preparedness and fuels, and there was also some additional funding for the workforce initiative. Some wildland fire facts and figures. You can see there's a lot going on in the fire program. And the fire season really now has turned into the fire year. And past years have been pretty severe, and we've seen huge losses to property and resources. In 2020, there were over 4,700 wildfires, which exceeded the 10-year average of about 3,856 acres. Over 923 acres burned, and that's almost 2.7 times the number of acres burned on the 10-year average. All across the fire agencies, efforts are being made And plans are being put in place to ensure that we're as prepared as possible for the current fire year. And where workforce is concerned, COVID did have impacts, but BIA Fire was still able to provide resources and respond to incidents, and really did an amazing job at keeping fires small when they did occur. As you can see, we still maintain a hotshot program at the BIA and the tribes, as well as providing support in the air with helicopters, seaplanes, and water scoopers. We also have our Model 52 program centers to support the rolling stock that we send out to support wildfire efforts. And I do want to note that the prevention program, by saying this, prevention programs are effective and important. The dollars invested in prevention significantly reduce the number of dollars needed for suppression. So can't stress prevention enough. Here, this slide is just a quick snapshot of wildfire hazard potential. This was a potential map done for 2020. And as you can see, there's a lot of area across the United States that was colored from moderate yellow to very high red. And we knew we were in for battle in 2020. The outlook, near-term outlook, April through July. And this is the last slide, providing a quick forecast. Hard to read. Again, it was in a form, it wasn't editable, but I'll provide you the key points. In April and May, it was expected that there would have been above fire potential in Florida, the Northern Plains, and the Southwest. Moving further out, in June and July, we expect that potential for above average wildfires could occur in the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Nevada, the Cascades, and the Western Coast Ranges. And we saw a fire in the Coast Ranges. There was a fire just outside of Otis on the Oregon coast, which burnt down homes and forced evacuations. And I don't believe we've seen fire incidents like that in the Oregon Coast Range for a number of years. So it's getting severe. And as you know, fire never really follows predictive models perfectly, but these are the kinds of models that do give us a tool to plan with, and that's what's being done now. Wanted to end the slide presentation here. This is really my staff. There's myself, Bodie, the acting fire director, Don, our Beaufort branch chief, John Basquette, our deputy timber sales forester out in Sacramento, Caleb Kane, our projects forester in Billings, Montana, where the timber team is also located. Ori Danzuko, we brought him on recently. He's our timber sales forester. Stacy Holmes, we stole her from Beaufort not long ago. Sorry, Don. And Stacy's been a great addition to central office as our forester analyst. I work with her almost daily, and Stacy's just done a great job. So with that completes the chief's report for the ITC Symposium. Be happy to take any questions. If there's anything that we don't get to, feel free to contact me by email, or if you have questions for any of the staff folks, contact them by their email as well. So with that, I'll conclude, and I thank you guys very much.
Hi, my name is Matt Hill. I'm the information specialist and the federal lobbyist for the Intertribal Timber Council. I've been working with ITC since I think about 2011, and before that I worked on Capitol Hill in the United States Senate, working collaboratively with ITC on a number of legislative priorities, including the Tribal Forest Protection Act. So today I just wanted to give you an overview of what's happening in Washington, D.C. on the Indian forestry front, and some things of interest and things we'll be looking at as we go into this 2-year Congress and into the relatively new Biden administration. So the first thing I wanted to do was talk a little bit about who's who in the Biden administration, since it's a whole new world, and the administration is still in the process of getting its appointees through the nomination process and into their full day jobs. So I wanted to focus primarily on the Department of the Interior. As you know, Secretary Deb Haaland has been confirmed by the Senate as the Secretary of the Interior. She had a fairly smooth confirmation process and gave up her congressional seat in New Mexico for that. She has a new chief of staff who is Larry Roberts, who is formerly a lawyer lobbyist type in the DC world, tribal member, and he had served as the acting assistant secretary for Indian Affairs in the Obama administration upon the departure of Kevin Washburn at the end of the administration. So Larry Roberts will oversee all of the departments, helping the secretary, craft her priorities and implement those. And the great thing is he knows Indian country and Indian policy issues extraordinarily well. Moving down over into the Indian Affairs column within the Department of Interior, Brian Newland has been nominated as the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. Newland is a citizen of the Bay Mills Indian community and was born and raised on the Bay Mills Reservation on the southern shore of Lake Superior. He recently completed his tenure as the elected president of Bay Mills Indian Community, where he previously served as chief judge of the tribal court. And prior to that, between 2009 and 2012, Newland served as counselor and policy advisor to the Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Indian Affairs under President Obama. So he and Larry Roberts were there at the same time. So until he is confirmed for the Assistant Secretary position, Brian Newland is his kind of day job, paid job, is Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, which is the number 2 slot there. But he serves as acting Assistant Secretary, so he has the power to make the decisions of the Assistant Secretary. And I expect his nomination will go through in fairly short order. Elsewhere in the BIA realm there, Daryl LeCount is still acting as the Bureau of Indian Affairs Director. And then if you move down the hall and up a floor, you get into the solicitor's office, which are all the attorneys at the department. Robert Anderson has been nominated as the solicitor for the Department of the Interior. He's currently employed as the principal deputy assistant solicitor. He comes from a deep history and understanding of Indian issues. He served as the associate solicitor in the Department of the Interior in the Clinton administration. He's a renowned professor of Indian law at the University of Washington. And so you're saying a lot of the top positions at the department, even beyond the Indian Affairs world, are being populated with people with a deep understanding of Indian affairs. So that is more or less the story at the Department of Interior. They seem to be on track for their nominations and confirmation process. One other agency that the ITC deals with a lot is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And here's the latest over there. So the secretary is Tom Vilsack. He is a returned secretary coming back from also serving as Secretary of Agriculture in the Obama administration. So he's a known quantity and was easily confirmed by the Senate. The nominee for Undersecretary of USDA for Environment, you may recall they split the USDA Undersecretary for Environment and Natural Resources into 2 positions. So the Undersecretary for Environment would cover agencies within USDA like NRCS. The nominee for that position is Robert Bonney. Mr. Bonney had served in the Obama administration as the Undersecretary for Natural Resources when it covered both Forest Service and NRCS. So he's the nominee there. I believe that he's currently acting as Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Policy Advisor for Climate. So I expect that Mr. Bonney will really be the climate guru for USDA. As for the other undersecretary position that covers natural resources and would be the political oversight for the U.S. Forest Service, the Biden administration has yet to issue a nominee for that, at least as of the time that I'm recording this video. I'm aware of a couple of potential candidates, both of whom come from Capitol Hill, both of whom have extensive experience working with ITC, Indian forestry issues, IFMAT, those types of things. So I think we're certainly going to have a positive person to work with, whoever the nominee ends up being for that. So that covers the who's who in the Biden administration, at least for our priorities. Let me shift gears over to Congress. So the House and the Senate have different committees that handle Indian Affairs issues. In the Senate, it's the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. The new chairman of that, and of course we have a Democratic majority in both House and Senate. So the chairman of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs is Brian Schatz, Democratic senator from Hawaii. The vice chair, who's the Republican ranking member, is Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, a longtime staunch supporter of Indian rights and positive Indian policy. I think it's the first time that the committee has been chaired by members from non-lower 48 states, so from Hawaii and Alaska. So that brings an interesting flavor to a lot of the hearings and make sure that the Alaskan and Hawaii folks are well represented in the oversight of U.S. Indian policy. Over on the House side, the House Natural Resources has jurisdiction for Indian affairs per se. The Natural Resources Committee is chaired by Congressman Raul Grijalva, Democrat from Arizona. The ranking member, which means the ranking Republican on the committee, is Congressman Bruce Westerman from Arkansas. Westerman is the only trained professional forester in Congress, a graduate of Yale School of Forestry, very aware of Indian forestry issues and very receptive to those. Within the House Natural Resources Committee is the Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples of the United States. This is functionally the Indian Affairs Subcommittee. It used to be called the Indian and Alaska Native Affairs Subcommittee. Now it's Indigenous Peoples. The chair of that committee is Democrat Congresswoman Teresa Fernandez from New Mexico. And the ranking member who's making a return appearance is the ranking Republican, is Congressman Don Young of Alaska, very, very strong defender of Indian rights and I believe a very strong supporter of Indian forestry. So that's the leadership in the Indian affairs world in Congress. So now I'd like to move into appropriations. This is an annual process for the ITC to work on. We are in fiscal year 2021, which for Congress ends at the end of September, and then October 1st will be the beginning of fiscal year 2022. So in December, Congress funded FY21. For BIA forestry, it's functionally flat. We've been flat for the last 2 years after receiving several years of increased appropriations from Congress. So now Congress is working on the FY 2022 budget and appropriations, which comes at an awkward time because you have a new administration that deserves the right to write its own budget request. So a few weeks ago, the Biden administration released what we call a skinny budget, which is big ticket items, major policy priorities, but it doesn't get into the line by line budget detail that normally an administration would have. From the skinny budget, we were able to tell that for the Department of Interior, for example, the Biden administration request provides $4 billion for the department for tribal programs, which is an increase of $600 million over the FY 2021 enacted level. And these programs range from teachers and students in tribal schools, clean energy development, tribal law enforcement, court programs, safety programs, BIE, BIA for the most part. We don't know what the administration's budget request is for tribal forestry yet, since this is more of the high level budget justification. However, in the next couple of weeks, we expect a full budget justification to be produced by the Biden administration, which would provide the kind of detail that we normally work on. But after all, Congress writes the checks, and it's up to them to determine how much money it is given to each federal agency. And I think I say this time every year to the ITC crowd that when it comes to budgets and appropriations, the president proposes and the Congress disposes. They actually have the final say. So we have submitted testimony for increased appropriations for BIA forestry, as we always do, and are in discussions with the Congressional Appropriations committees to accomplish that. Next, just a couple things coming out of the Department of Interior that might be of interest to the ITC community. One is that the department has changed its process for taking land into trust. The previous administration had virtually moved all fee to trust decisions for Indian lands from the regional offices to the Washington, D.C. office, which created certainly a bottleneck of reviewing those applications, and also not allowing regional BIA directors the latitude to make those decisions on their own. So those are back to the regional directors, with the exception of gaming applications. So any fee to trust application that has to do with gaming will remain in the DC office for consideration, and that hasn't changed in quite some time. In addition to the Secretary's order on that, the Solicitor's Office within the Department of Interior withdrew 3 previous opinions that impeded the department's ability to take land into trust for tribes, and that they believe were issued without taking into consideration tribal consultation. So going forward, the department has pledged that it will engage in meaningful and robust consultation with tribes to learn about any challenges they face in the fee to trust process and in managing their own lands. One of those opinions that the Solicitor's Office withdrew was one previously issued by the Trump administration that had, they believe, erroneously concluded that the Secretary of the Interior does not have the discretionary authority to take land into trust for tribes in Alaska. So that has been reversed, meaning it goes back to a previous decision that believed that the Secretary of the Interior does have authority to take land into trust under the Indian Reorganization Act for tribes in Alaska. Next, I wanted to let you know that the Biden administration has resumed what is called the Council on Native American Affairs. This council is a council that consists of leaders of agencies and cabinet positions within the administration to collaborate on Indian affairs and policy across all agencies within the U.S. government. So consider this like, kind of like your cabinet meeting, but dealing only with Indian affairs. This Council on Native American Affairs had been established in the Obama administration and met several times. It was eliminated during the Trump administration and now brought back by the Biden administration. And Secretary Deb Haaland, Secretary of Interior, will serve as the council's chair. Now getting into the weeds a little bit, you know, we come off of a really horrible fire season in 2020, particularly in places like Oregon and California, that had literally the worst wildfire season ever experienced on record. So now the question is, what's anyone going to do about it? And you may recall, you know, 15 years or so ago, we had similar circumstances, and Congress ultimately wrote the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, the Tribal Forest Protection Act, and created those authorities as a way to try to turn the tide on fire. And at that time, the idea was that more management would be able to change the level and intensity of fires across the U.S. So now it's a little bit different. The fires are still here. There's more emphasis on climate change. You have a united Democratic government between the White House, the House, and the Senate. And so they need to deal with fire, but they may not deal with it the same way that a Republican Congress would. So the result is you get a lot of fights over how to deal with fire. And one example is a recent committee hearing in the last week or so in the House Natural Resources Committee on really it was on fire, but it was the effect of climate change on fire. And the subcommittee chairman of the Forest and Lands Subcommittee, Congressman from Colorado, said, quote, "Wildfires are one of the most immediate and obvious effects of climate change, and they're only expecting to increase as climate continues to warm." And he went down the path of how climate is exacerbating the factors that lead to fires. And then his response of how to deal with it, other than solving climate change, is to create a civilian climate corps that would make robust investments in federal restoration efforts and to grow the federal land management workforce. The Republicans on the subcommittee shot back, saying, this is Congressman Russ Fulcher from Republican from Idaho. He said, quote, "The frequency of this devastation has blunted some of our collective shock, but we must not allow that to turn that into complacency. We must also dispel the notion that there is nothing we can do. Decades of insufficient forest management, not climate change, have led to overgrown, diseased forests throughout the West," end quote. So again, you have this showdown between Democrats and Republicans over what is causing increased intensity and scale of wildfire. Is it climate change or is it management? Is it both? Is it neither? These are the debates that are having, and you have to have those debates before you figure out what you're going to do to solve the problem. Anyhow, I won't go into too much more detail, but the hearing just continued to devolve into a partisan back and forth, blaming the other side for complacency or having ill intentions on how to solve the problem. So, you know, we're kind of in the middle of all this, trying to address both climate change and forest management, which on the one hand allows us to talk to both sides, but on the other hand doesn't place us squarely on one side or the other. And that's okay. That means both sides want to help you, and that's a good place to be. So looking ahead at some of the issues I see for ITC this Congress, you know, like I said, wildfire will be a major topic of discussion, and a lot of that has to do with funding for fuels management, funding for suppression, funding for infrastructure, fire infrastructure, those types of things. And then, of course, there's the management discussion. Are there things we could be doing on federal forests to treat more acres, and which acres to treat, and how to decide that, and how to fund it, and how to figure out the efficiency and effectiveness of that funding. Smoke management is something that has come up before. Senator Wyden from Oregon has a bill that would make prescribed fires easier for land managers to do. and create significant incentives and funding for them to do more of it. Climate change, certainly a major discussion in all this. And then there's reforestation, which is, the question of, what do you do after fires, or what did we not do after fires 15, 20 years ago? And a lot of people are talking about reforestation, both left and right, Democrat and Republican. The primary bill that seems to be moving right now is called the Replant Act, which is an acronym for repairing existing public land by adding necessary trees. I think they struggled to make that spell replant. But that bill is focused entirely on the U.S. Forest Service, and what it does is it increases the amount of money coming from going into the Reforestation Trust Fund, which comes from a tariff on imported lumber products, I think, and wood products, and it would create a lot more money available to the Forest Service for replanting, and in fact directs the Forest Service to plant 1.2 billion trees. It has bipartisan support. It's chaired by, or it's sponsored by the chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, but it doesn't address BIA land, doesn't address BLM land. And so I'm working with the Agriculture Committee to address reforestation issues and the reforestation backlog on BIA lands and make sure that we're included in that. Another bill is Senator Cory Booker's Climate Stewardship Act, which ITC has worked with him for a while on, and it specifically does have a provision for reforestation on BIA lands or Indian trust lands, and directs the agency to plant a certain number of trees per year for several years to reduce that reforestation backlog. And then finally, there's the Trillion Trees Act, which is sponsored by Republican Bruce Westerman, who we talked about. It is kind of tiers into the International Trillion Trees Initiative, has some funding for research on wood products and those types of things. But I would say is even though it's bipartisan, it's probably seen as a little more on the Republican end of the spectrum. Otherwise, there's a couple technical fixes that ITC is still working on. One is on Good Neighbor Authority, where in the 2018 Farm Bill, tribes were inadvertently not entirely added into the GNA program. Technically, we're there, but tribes aren't allowed to retain receipts to build kind of a program budget to build up a stewardship program like states can do. Same thing with counties. So we need to fix that by amending the Farm Bill. And then there's another program that was authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill called the Landscape Scale Restoration Program. Here, again, Congress thought that they included tribes in the program, but didn't, in an error in the drafting. So tribes are actually defined in it, and then they never actually use the phrase Indian tribe in the functional part of the bill. So right now, only non-industrial private forest landowners are included in that program. Forest Service says they can't do anything until Congress fixes the language, so we're going to have Congress fix the language. So that's kind of a snapshot of the field of play as I see it, and the things that we'll be working on for the next couple of years. And I think there'll probably be questions in the chat room, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Reed Robinson. I'm the Director of the Office of Tribal Relations for the Forest Service. I'm honored to be able to represent the Forest Service in providing you this update today. This year's Thriving Through Adversity theme is perfect for this symposium, and in Indian country, it's much more than a metaphor. This moment we're in across this country and in government with respect to Indian country, it seems promising and energizing, and most of all, welcoming. Already this year, we've seen important intention and action from this incoming administration, resulting in substantial work to assess USDA agency operations, consultation, and program and service delivery. This started with an analysis of the executive orders and presidential memoranda, particularly Executive Order 13985, advancing equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government, and the presidential memorandum on tribal consultation and strengthening nation-to-nation relationships. The president issued that memorandum 6 days after his inauguration. That's a significant signal. Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. I've got to say that the agency knows how the pandemic has disproportionately impacted Indian country. Proposed USDA activities include department-wide conversations and planning to develop new, more accountable regulation and processes this year, such as new USDA regulation and manual on tribal consultation and government responsibilities by incorporating recommendations from the March 2021 USDA consultations. The Forest Service is doing an all-agency review of existing or potential policy to conform to that new direction. We're expanding education and training of USDA staff and improving an evaluation and reporting of USDA consultation and tools to facilitate it. The Forest Service leadership commitment in recognizing the moment we are in within the Forest Service has resulted in a reassessment and inventory of how we relate to and do business with tribes. The entire national leadership team in the Forest Service participated in both of the USDA consultation and the separate forestry session with the Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment. The leadership team in the Forest Service has also convened multiple internal conversations to discuss tribal input as a result of the consultation and listening session. These efforts represent the commitment from the Forest Service leadership and resulted in Chief Christensen's comments and commitments to reaching beyond our foundational responsibilities and making a higher commitment, taking a deeper inventory of our systems, and redeeming our responsibility. This work is being undertaken with a focus on equity in Forest Service operations and activities that demonstrates accountability while identifying both barriers and opportunities. Inside the Office of Tribal Relations as a new director for the Forest Service Office of Tribal Relations, I've been in this position for about 7.5 months. In these past months, I've spent time in both orienting myself and identifying critical actions and activities to improve tribal relations, such as taking the deeper dive into the Forest Service staff, relationships, and organizational structure and culture. Identified OTR program priorities such as training development, service-wide tribal relations leadership and direction, and beginning to braid traditional ecological knowledge and science with Western science, and elevating the critical importance of our legal and political obligations to Indian country. And all feeder in the circle approach to responding to both tribal nations and the administration. We've also been working on the development of a refined consultation protocol for national policy making. and significant engagement on high-profile diplomatic matters that include Bears Ears, Oak Flat, the Alaska Roadless Rule, and so on. So inside the Forest Service and the agency, there's substantive partnership with tribes that are occurring. Many of you have been engaged with the Forest Service over the past 2 years, working on improvements to implementing the Tribal Forest Protection Act, as well as the new 638 authority. And I say Wopila, we're grateful. And so far, 2 demonstration projects have been executed. There are another 5 proposals confirmed, with several agreements nearing completion, and 25 Tribal Forest Service partnerships for follow-up from the recent TFPA workshops. You can also expect that 638 policy development will move forward in earnest late this summer or early fall, and pre-consultation listening sessions are in the planning stages for the coming months. Under research and development, efforts have recently been reignited to work tailored to go beyond R&D's 2015 Tribal Engagement Roadmap, as well as efforts to increase accountability in Forest Service research projects and increase a more collaborative posture in R&D decision-making. On log or hauler relief, important developments are occurring outside the Forest Service with the Farm Service Agency. The Consolidated Appropriation Act of 2021 authorizes over $11 billion for USDA to prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus. Under this provision, the Secretary of Agriculture may use not more than $200 million to provide relief to timber harvesting and timber hauling businesses that have, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, experienced a loss of not less than 10% in gross revenue during the period, beginning on January and ending December 2020, as compared to the gross revenue of that timber harvesting or hauling business during the same period in 2019. The FSA and Forest Service are collaborating with the department to send invitations to tribal leaders this week in order to hold a consultation on logger and hauler relief, tentatively scheduled for June 9th, 3 p.m. Eastern. So watch out for that. And we'll work with ITC to make sure that those consultation meetings are amplified. So as I mentioned, we're in a moment. This moment, it really feels like that gate when when you're in that circle, that sacred circle. There's gates. In the Lakota culture, we call it the Hochoka. It's inside that sacred circle, and there's 4 gates representing 4 directions. And when those gates are open, good things come in. If the circle is strong, and I see nothing but strength in Indian country everywhere I look. I see struggles too, but I see strength over that. And that adversity that the Indian country has endured for centuries is a significant tenement to survival on these lands. So we're in this moment together. And so next year at the 45th Symposium, we'll look back and we'll be able to say, yeah, we did this much. We got much more to do. So thank you, Pilamae, for allowing me to spend some time with you today.
Hello again. Recognizing that I'm the last presentation of the day, I want to take the opportunity to thank the presenters we had this morning, both the keynote speaker our federal partners, and our lobbyist, Matt Hill. And I will move into the President's report. So the 44th Annual National Indian Timber Symposium's President's Report, recognizing that we missed the symposium last year and many things have occurred since the pandemic ensued and we had our last symposium almost 2 years ago now. So quick agenda. First, I'll talk about COVID-19 pandemic impacts just briefly. I think because of the impacts of the pandemic, it's hard to start any conversation without first recognizing how that's impacted Indian country, the nation, and the world. Second, a brief discussion about IFMAT, changes in the administration and Congress, and understanding that Matt Hill has already covered this in detail, but there's a couple additional points I want to make about opportunities I think tribes have over this next couple of years. An update on ITARA, an update on the implementation of Public Law 93-638 authority for the Tribal Forest Protection Act, and our continuing lobbying efforts. So jumping right into the agenda, again, recognizing that this pandemic is a little over a year old at this point, that it's impacted approximately 33 million people within the United States, and I'm sure that number will be higher by the time you see the presentation, recognizing that almost 600,000 people have died from COVID-19, and that Indian country has seen disproportionately high infection rates. And also understanding that with those higher infection rates, there's psychological impacts associated with the loss Indian country has experienced and the isolation that it's created amongst our communities. Indian people in general are very close-knit communities, very family-oriented. So I know this has had some very profound impacts on the mental health of our people here at Colville, and I'm sure that is true of Indian country nationwide. Maybe the best example I have was one of our council members was testifying before the Washington State Legislature and explained that how difficult it had been to him to not see his family. His father is elderly, he hasn't been able to hug him for 9 months. That's something that really wears on people mentally. And again, understanding that and how that impacts just our day-to-day lives and what's happened over the last year. I just want to acknowledge that, send out my prayers and thoughts to Indian country in general, and look forward to the day that we get back together, understanding that we now have vaccinations going out. I think Indian country has done a better job than most of getting those distributed to their members. So hopefully we're on the tail end of this pandemic. Hopefully for the 45th Annual Timber Symposium, we will all be meeting in person. Next, a quick update on IFMAT, and I'll make this fairly brief because I know Adrian Layton has a more detailed update about this scheduled for tomorrow. But just a quick update that the IFMAT team is complete. We've got the co-chairs, we've got transition co-chairs, we've got specialists with contracts in place, and we're working on getting the student participants set up. We have the 8 congressionally mandated questions that we'll be answering, along with 3 additional questions. We've started to schedule site visits for the upcoming summer. Should be 40 sites in total, budget and COVID restrictions allowing, and invitations should have went out. I know that we've seen ours at Colville, and others scheduled for the 2021 field season should have seen theirs as well. Also note that those visits will happen both in person and virtually, probably virtually first, so that we can lay the groundwork, share the handbook, talk about any COVID restrictions that are in place or concerns and protocols that the tribes have. But just want to reinforce the importance of the IFMAT report. The handbook is extremely helpful in identifying what the intent of the visit is, what type of information the team is trying to gather, so that we can make the most informed report to Congress in 2023. The last 3 IFMAT reports did a great job of demonstrating the discrepancies in funding, really the good management that tribal people do regardless of a lack of funding, but acknowledging that there are funding discrepancies, that there are needs in Indian country that aren't currently being met. And really, this is one of our better opportunities to demonstrate that with this third-party team of experts relaying those messages to Congress. And as always with these IFMAT reports, we will have a list of items, action items that come out of the report that we'll work on probably for the next 5 to 10 years until we get to IFMAT 5. So moving on to changes in administration. Again, I want to applaud the administration and the Senate for confirming Deb Haaland as the Secretary of Interior. I think that's a huge step for Indian country to have the first Native American serve as a Secretary of Interior. Followed Deb Haaland very closely while she was a Congresswoman. Recognize we have great opportunities to work with her and the appointees that will follow. Also recognizing that Tom Vilsack was confirmed as a Secretary of Ag, and remembering the good working relationship we had with him while he was in that same position during the Obama administration. So we look forward to that continued working relationship with USDA. As ITC's organization has made great strides with USDA. I think always had a pretty good working relationship with both the Chief Forester, Vicki Christensen. We've now got Reed in the Office of Tribal Relations. I think just a lot of great alignment between agendas for USDA and BIA and the tribes. Also wanted to note that now that we've got Democratic control of the White House, Senate, and House of Representatives, there's some different agendas that weren't possible under the past administration. And I know things like climate change that are very, very important to some tribes will likely be daylighted, will likely be agendas that are priorities under this administration. So I think we've got some great opportunities to work with the current administration and their appointees and the House and Senate to try to further some of those agendas. Moving on to ITARA, 2 titles that it seems like we've made pretty significant progress on over the past couple of years. Most notably is Title II, the Indian Trust Asset Management Demonstration Projects. At the time of recording, we had 2 approved Indian Trust Asset Management Plans, and I think 2 additional applications that are being reviewed. We also know that this spring, Coquille has started to implement their first timber sale under their approved Indian Trust Asset Management Plan. So ITC is tracking this very closely. We're very excited for Coquille. We want to recognize where there's efficiencies in this process, where there's some changes that potentially need to be made. And again, as a demonstration project, we want to be successful so that these authorities are made permanent. So we'll continue to engage there, continue to track that, continue to work with BIA staff as further applications come in. I expect that as tribes see the success of those tribes that have approved ITAMs, that they will submit applications and we'll see further use of the Indian Trust Asset Management Act. In addition to Title II, Title III for improving efficiency and streamlining of processes required that a plan for sunsetting OST was developed. That plan has been implemented. OST is no longer in existence or not in the same format anyways. And we have a Bureau of Trust Funds Administration established. So while that's important to many of the tribes who have trust assets and stumpage revenues, which includes probably many of the tribes here, this is a little different format, and just wanted to note that that change had been made and interested to see how that new bureau works in processing some of those same responsibilities OST had. This is one of our biggest accomplishments over the last couple years and something we've put a ton of work into. So implementation of Public Law 93-638 authority for TFPA. When the 2018 Farm Bill was approved, I don't know if the ITC knew that those 2 authorities would be included. It's something that we had lobbied for a number of years. but we're very excited to see the language that included 638 contract authority for TFPA proposals and expansion of good neighbor authority to tribes. So to take advantage of those new authorities, ITC started almost immediately working with Forest Service staff to determine what that might look like in USDA compared to the DOI model that tribes are very familiar with. So this was a lengthy process, reviewing regulatory requirements, authorities within USDA compared to DOI, and over a number of meetings over the last year and a half, ultimately led to a template for both the agreement mechanism, how financial information is shared, and ultimately a set of documents that tribes can utilize to enter into these types of agreements. So something I should clarify, that under the Department of Interior, these are 638 contracts. Under USDA, these are 638 agreements. So again, because of authorities and the way that money moves in different federal agencies, just a small difference, but operationally very similar. To ensure that this information was shared to a broad audience to take advantage of these authorities, ITC hosted workshops in April and May, 4 total days where we brought a number of different Forest Service staff and Indian tribes through a webinar series, through Zoom meetings together to try to explain how this mechanism would work, where the opportunities are, and try to really create that dialogue that would lead to future TFPA projects. We had more than 100 people participate in all 4 days, I think. A lot of great dialogue, a lot of great questions asked in the chat. And we think that we will likely have many, many more applications coming in the very near future. Again, a great opportunity for tribes to now actively engage in the planning and implementation of projects on adjacent federal land. It gives us an opportunity to daylight and make some of those tribal priorities real drivers in what those planning efforts look like, and ensure that, using this example that we have from Tulalip with the beaver reintroduction, ensuring that what those tribal priorities are become priorities of the Forest Service. And our Forest Service partners have been great to engage on this. I think this is information they've wanted for a long time. This just gives us a mechanism, both from a communication standpoint and now a funding standpoint, to share those ideas, to incorporate those tribal employees into those processes, and really make some positive gain on federal land management from a tribal perspective. So to date, we have 1 approved 638 agreement between the Tulalip tribe and Forest Service. This was signed last September, I believe. Again, fairly simple project focused on beaver reintroduction to improve aquatic habitats. We have 2 other pending agreements, one with Colville, well, the Colville tribe and the Colville National Forest, and one with Yakima. 2 slightly different projects. Colville's is really based on a timber sale project where we'll go in and try to accomplish a bunch of forest restoration goals that include tribal priorities. And the Yakima project is really focused on fisheries habitat management and improvements. 2 different sources of funding going into these things from a tribal perspective, but again, a great opportunity to utilize these new authorities to accomplish tribal priorities and projects on adjacent federal land. One of the other limitations that we've almost overcome with this pilot project is that the templates that were developed were in a pilot phase. So I know the Forest Service staff have worked hard with OMB to try to remove that tag because there was a limitation of 12 total projects that could be used with that designation. But if it's not fixed by the time we have the symposium, it will be very close. So there shouldn't be a limit on the number of projects that we can take on during this pilot project phase. And again, our ultimate goal is to have this authority made permanent. And we're kind of looking towards the 2023 Farm Bill as an opportunity to do that. To close out, I'll just mention some of the continuing lobby efforts ITC has. So first, the Good Neighbor Authority was expanded to tribes within the 2018 Farm Bill as well, but it did not expand the ability to use revenue from those projects. So where states have been successful in many situations, there's some seed money that's put in up front. They utilize that to develop, plan, and implement the first Good Neighbor project, and then revenue generated from that is put into account with the Forest Service that they use to fund subsequent planning and staffing on future projects. So I think that's a great mechanism for tribes to use as well, to provide funding for regular tribal staffing and interaction on those federal projects. And we'll continue to work on that. There's a couple of different congressmen that we've been in conversation with. We expect to hopefully get that resolved in the next couple of years, but something we'll continue to pursue. We also submitted appropriations testimony, a big increase in fuels and preparedness funding this year in the budget. We hope those will stick. We've definitely supported those in the past. We support them going forward. Obviously, lobbying is a little different this year with COVID restrictions. It was written testimony that was submitted, but when given the opportunity, we will be back in DC to touch base with those folks on the Appropriations Committee, ensure they understand those tribal priorities and why those funding increases are critical to Indian country. We're also looking forward to the 2023 Farm Bill. Recognizing the great strides we made with the 2018 Farm Bill, we have that opportunity again coming up in the next couple of years. So ITC is engaged with the NCAI, reviewing what tribal priorities might be across the board of Farm Bill authorities and priorities, but recognizing that through the forestry component of that, we could probably make further gains, and we want to make sure we prioritize what those are. And we'll continue to reach out to our member tribes, understand where there's issues with either funding mechanisms through NRCS or operational restrictions with other programs. But from a forest perspective, again, trying to make as much progress as we can looking towards that 2023 Farm Bill. And lastly, working towards consultation and this shared stewardship contract. So we've made great strides in consultation over the last 5 years, especially, well, 10 years probably, but being very mindful that that consultation needs to continue, that we need to continue, that we need to have dialogue with our federal partners, with Congress, make sure they understand what priorities Indian country has and how we can further those agendas. So again, that's been very limited under these COVID restrictions, but looking forward to post-COVID life, we will re-engage in that consultation process, go about the lobbying efforts that ITC has historically. And to close, I'd just like to thank all the member tribes of ITC. Right now, we have 54 of them for their continued support. Your opinions, insights are very, very important to us. Recognizing that ITC represents you, and we want to be mindful of what your priorities are and ensure that what we work on aligns with what those tribal goals are. I also want to thank the board members and the staff for the immense amount of work they put in, recognizing that, especially for the board members, everybody else has a job that's very, very busy all the time, and we have some very dedicated people that put in a lot of work in addition to their regular 9 to 5. So just want to thank those individuals. And then all of our partners that in the time that I've been on ITC, which is about 15 years now, I've seen tremendous growth in the number of people that we engage with, the organizations that reach out to us, and I think they recognize the great success we've had as the Intertribal Timber Council. So we appreciate that engagement, look forward to continuing it, and again, just want to say thank you. So that's really all I have. So in closing, I hope everybody enjoyed the morning. Look forward to the next few days, and thank you.
Thank you, Cody, and all of our presenters. We are now going to open up and see if there's any additional comments, questions, discussion. We had a few questions come through during the presentations. If you didn't take a look at those, we encourage you to take a look. We had some questions regarding personnel and equipment, what's available. We also had some discussion and questions in the question answer box regarding vacancies and positions being filled at BIA. So let's just see if anyone wants to raise their hand and answer any additional questions. Any additional comments that our presenters would like to share while we're waiting to hear from others? If folks are not sure how to view the question and answer, you can go to the box below and press that question answer tab. And then right now, our panelists are muted, so I'm just gonna unmute you in case you all wanted to jump in. Everybody might just be ready to go to our mixer.
Hey, Stephanie, if I could real quick. Obviously, our first virtual symposium, we've got the format pretty well laid out for the next 3 days. But if there's some feedback people would like to add either in the chat or speak up on, feel free to do so, and we'll try to accommodate to the best of our ability.
Definitely. And it looks like we have a question that just came in from Sophie Asher regarding BIA pathways, youth engagement. Are there opportunities for kids involved in the juvenile justice system, or is that a bar to forestry work? Stacy, do you want to take a crack at that question first?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that we'll have an opportunity to talk about the pathways, I believe, later in the symposium. And Peter Wakeland will be participating tomorrow if you'd like to ask him any questions about that.
So Sophie, we encourage you to ask that question then, and we'll also just track it to bring it to Pete's attention when he's online. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, you folks are still welcome to jump in, but we are approaching the end of the hour. And remind everyone that we will be doing a virtual mixer from 1 to 2, and you can access that through the Event Squid website. And we will, once we officially adjourn, we'll walk everybody through how to get back to that Event Squid website again. And for those of you that were unable to see the opening ceremony or any of those videos, those are available for streaming at the Event Squid. You just go to that agenda item, which we'll walk through again later today. And you can view that anytime through the rest of the symposium. So between now and Thursday. So if there are no further questions, we'll adjourn officially for our speakers, let you all get ready for your virtual mixer. And if anybody has any additional questions, they can send them in chat. As Cody mentioned, if there's any requests in terms of format or discussion, please send those to chat and we will do our best to accommodate those. And we'll adjourn for today and then reconvene again tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific. Again, everything is through Event Squid, so we will walk through how to go through that for everybody. But if you know how to navigate Event Squid and you're not having any troubles, you can jump off and freshen up before the virtual mixer at the Toucan app. So with that, I want to just thank everybody for joining us today and all of our panelists, presenters, and the ITC staff for all your hard work. Any last comments from our presenters? Cody, it looks like you were trying to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, I did. Thought maybe Cynthia had something to say. I saw her pop up on the screen. Just wanted to thank everyone for their participation today. Obviously, we'd much rather meet in person. Are definitely looking forward to next year. Miss getting to see everybody. This is an event I look forward to every single year, and definitely looking forward to it next year, since it'll be 2 years since we've got to see a lot of people that I only see during this time of year. So thanks again, everybody. Hopefully we'll have more availability tomorrow, a few more people attending. And again, feel free to reach out to us at any time during the week.
Yep. Thank you. Oh, and we got a comment in the chat to remind everybody to check out the raffle. I'll put that link in the chat box again. And you can also access and take a look at what the raffle prizes are by going to the event squid, which we will navigate shortly. Cynthia, did you have some comments?
Hi, Cody, you were right. I was going to chime in and just say this is my first time participating with ITC. Normally I'm in the background getting Jeff prepared, but I really appreciate being here. And even as we look forward to signing the MOU with ITC, looking forward to getting that memorialized, that won't stop the great work that we've been able to do together. So thanks again.
Excellent. And as is always, as soon as we're about to go, we did get a quick question in the question and answer. And this might be something that's for later in the symposium, but we had a question about where we can learn more about policies regarding smoke management in Oregon, replant, Climate Stewardship Act, etc. Is that something any of our panelists can reply to, or perhaps it's something for later in the agenda?
Can they give more detail about what replant is? Are they talking about one of the legislative proposals like trillion trees or a BIA-led initiative? Okay. That's probably best answered by Matt. I know there's a few different legislations proposed. So Matt, if you could just speak to the replanting proposals and then Climate Stewardship Act. I'm not familiar with that one maybe.
Yeah, so there's a few different ones, and the primary one at this point seems to be the Replant Act, which is aimed entirely at the Forest Service, and yet, like I said, it doesn't include any other agency, BIA, BLM. It's going through the agriculture committees. A lot of Midwestern members are advocating for it. I've been in discussion with it uses revenue from the tariffs on imported wood products to pay for things. And I've been in touch with the Ag Committee about them leaving out BIA or Indian Trust Forests, and we're trying to work something out, either to put it into that bill or to move something separately that would address the tribal forests. The Cory Booker bill, which is the Climate Stewardship Act, it is a little bit different. It's kind of mandatory reforestation, but it also has like urban forestry and private conservation, private reforestation, but it doesn't seem to be moving very far. So I think the Replant Act is the primary vehicle. The Trillion Trees Initiative, I would say, has minimal bipartisan support, but I don't think it's going to move just based on it. It's seen by House Democrats as more partisan in perspective.